Welcome to Engaging Leaders, a Leadership Maryland podcast brought to you by Beacon at Salisbury University and BFG Financial Advisors. Since 1992, Leadership Maryland has been connecting and empowering leaders through transformational experiences, dialogue, and education. Each month, we host candid conversations to promote positive outcomes in your organizations and communities. I'm your host, Eric Brotman, and I'm joined by my fantastic co-host, Memo Diriker from Salisbury University. Memo, welcome. Good to be back with you.
Thank you.
Would you do the honors of introducing our guest today?
It's going to be my pleasure. Today we have Jim Perdue, chairman of the board of Perdue Farms, and a philanthropist and a community leader here on the Eastern Shore in Maryland and throughout the country. Jim has also been a graduate of our Leadership Maryland program, and Jim was a student of mine many, many years ago. Jim, welcome.
Great to be here, Memo. Thanks.
So I get the honor of asking you the first question. It is clear that we're going through some difficult, tumultuous times. What is the role of leadership in these kinds of times, in your opinion?
Well, these times are very interesting because there's a lot we had to learn and a lot we're still learning. So there was no book to pick up and guide you on how to navigate this incredible pandemic. So, one thing that's always important in any crisis or situation like this is communications. And so trying to make sure you communicate continuously with everybody, not just the associates, but, the customer base, our board, family members. We're privately held, so family members are a big part of the company, but and especially within our operations where we have the bulk of our number of our associates. So communications is really important, and also this learning issue. I've always tried to. When I was the CEO, I always told everybody we need to be a learning organization, and not only we need to find out why things are the way they are. So. And in this situation, learning was really important. So, for example, we brought back our chief medical officer who had retired a couple of years ago, and he was really important for him to navigate with state health agencies because, that was really difficult from state to state. We're in, 15 or 16 states, and every state has their own rules. And so somebody had to be able to talk to the health officer of each state, and so he did a great job of that. And that's beyond the federal CDC guidelines that go out. So those are a couple of the key things I think that were important as we embarked on this journey to overcome this pandemic.
Jim, if I can piggyback on that, if one thing COVID has done is shine the spotlight on food production, distribution, and safety, all of which have always been important, but which are potentially even more amplified today. How has this impacted your organization, your industry, and certainly the shore specifically? Well,
of course, the first thing that got shut down was the food service industry, restaurants, and 50% of the food eaten in the United States is prepared away from home. So that's quite a shock to our system. And for Perdue, it wasn't as big a shock because we're 75 to 80% retail supermarket focused, and only 20-25% food service. But for companies that were much more 90% food service, obviously it was much bigger impact. Part of it was the food service business that we did have. We had to switch a lot of the packaging, just a lot of the nuts and bolts to a retail effort. The second thing was, as March and April and then into May, the positivity in our plants, started to go up. And so what happens, we have strict rules on quarantining, and then within an area, if somebody became positive, then you have to do some contact tracing, figure out who else bottom line is we had a lot of absenteeism, either voluntary or of course we would send them home with pay for 2 weeks. So it was hard to run a plant, one of our harvest plants, because we didn't have our full complement of associates. And that once we were able to, figure out a lot of the ways you keep this thing from spreading, it became much better. Say in late May, early June, we really felt like we got our hands around how to prevent this. The one area though that was always a problem was we felt pretty safe in the plants for our associates, but on the trip home, we had some folks that have a van pool, so they'd take their masks off in the parking lot, getting in a van with 10 people. That was a real problem. And then they go home and they don't maybe do the things they should or shouldn't do at home. So that was an area that we really needed help from the state to help educate folks on what you should be doing when you're not at work. But by and large, we were able to, one thing that happens with our industry is we have chickens growing every day. They have to go somewhere or else they'll keep growing. So, but we were able to do that by moving chickens around. So, for example, we had some operations that didn't have as much problem as others. So we could move those chickens from one place to another. And bottom line, we did not have to basically, do away with chickens on the farm, which did happen quite a few places in the United States because they couldn't bring them into a plant. We never got to that point, which I think is just part of the effort that everybody put into making this thing happen.
Jim, getting away from the pandemic for just a moment, you talked about the company being a family company, and within the company, you've been developing leadership. How do you think your leadership is different than your dad's?
Quite a bit different. It's interesting. My dad was a classic entrepreneur and somewhat of an authoritarian, and I only say that not in a negative way, but I think it was very appropriate at the time in the 50s and 60s. I think, for example, the strategy of the company was in his head, and it wasn't because, as he would tell you, it wasn't because he was so brilliant. It's because he spent so much time in the market. He had a very good sense of what kinds of products, that we should be producing, for example. It was interesting when I came back into the company and I got into the management team. We started doing some things like a Myers-Briggs, on personality profiles, and it turned out that our company at the time was a very, very strong ESTJ, for those of you who are interested or remember that. But what was interesting is that all 12 senior people in the company were identical. So it was interesting that we were very good at executing on something. And my dad was the kind of the leader and the holder of the strategy of what we needed to do. And when I came in 1991 as the CEO, I am, number one, I'm not an ESTJ, and number two, myself and our then president, who also came in at the same time, a fellow by the name of Pelham Lawrence from Salisbury, we wanted people to run their business and to make decisions in their business. And that was very, very different than the leadership style under my dad. I remember a story of somebody coming to Pelham one day and said, I got this problem, what should I do? And Pelham sort of said, well, I don't know, it beats the hell out of me, but you're being paid enough money, why don't you figure it out, go talk to your people, and come back to me with your decision. And that was very uncomfortable. So in other words, I think Frank Perdue took all the risk in making decisions. And something didn't work, it was his fault. It wasn't the fault of the 12 senior people in the company. But now we were asking people to make decisions and be accountable for those decisions. And I think we lost 75% of those 12 people in the first year and a half because they weren't comfortable running their business, as it were, and making decisions and being accountable for those decisions. So that was a big change in the company's leadership style. And we wanted strategic planning to be part of what everybody contributed to. As I used to say, when my dad was basically building a great brand, the only problem was producing enough product to fulfill the demand. So the strategy was pretty simple. And so you'd say, take that hill. A hill may be, say, Chicago market. And we had people who could execute that really well. But by the time the 90s came around, you had to be careful which hill you were going after because you could make some mistakes. So strategic planning became very important in making sure we knew which hills we needed to go after. And again, that was a very different environment for a senior manager to be contributing to a strategic plan. So those are just some examples. And by the way, we became a very diverse company as it relates to, we had feelers and we had, we had the whole group. And that's what makes a better decision, as we all know, in any just, kind of the team of rivals with Abraham Lincoln kind of a situation where you really get better decisions, I think. It's just that my dad, I think, was just so bright in the area of marketing and where we needed to be. So that was a big change in leadership.
Jim, I can still remember your dad's TV commercials growing up, and it was a brand that was iconic in particularly this area. Growing up in Maryland, you talked a lot about your senior leadership team and how that turnover occurred. Let's talk about some of your maybe emerging or upcoming folks within the company. How are you helping to groom future leaders of the company? It's one thing to go out and recruit someone with 20 years of leadership experience. It's another thing to groom young leaders. How has Perdue Farms been able to make that a reality?
Well, I think it's been a journey. We used to have a very robust, we used to call it succession planning process, and which was carried out all down throughout the organization. But I think it's better today because the board of directors, and we have 5 independent board members, all from outside companies. They're very much into that, and that is one of the key jobs of our board is talent management, and especially the very senior levels of management. Who's the next CEO, for example? And so they're very, very active. And in fact, one individual there who runs our compensation committee, which is where our talent management resides, is actually, this past 2 months, he's been weekly on calls with the CEO and myself and others because he's very, very helpful in, trying to figure out how to do that well. And of course, within our talent management, we do have identified groups of what we call high potentials, and those high potentials, is something that where we've been spending a lot of time. It's a very small group. They're given mentors. There could be compensation benefits being in that role. And then in a lot of outside training, a lot of outside contact with other leaders. But those are the folks that we're gonna basically spend more time on, grooming them to be the next leaders in the company. And some of them may be in a senior level now, some of them may be 2 levels down. But we've identified that they have the talent to really be an up and coming leader.
Jim, since you left the day-to-day running of the corporation to others, you've been involved in community leadership. Talk to us a little bit about that.
Yeah, I think depending on where your company is, our company is located in Salisbury, and we're the largest employer here, so we have a fiduciary duty, I think, to be very involved, and we actually have all of our senior people have to be connected somehow with some community group, whether it's a university or whether it's a Greater Salisbury Committee or a development board. We want them to be out and about, using their talents to help the community. And that actually goes through every operation we have. If we have operations in very rural counties in North Carolina or South Carolina, the leadership there is very involved in that local area because, again, we are usually the largest employer in that area, and so it's a responsibility we take seriously. And I think you need, it helps if you're doing something you really love. I had before I came back to the company, I had got some training in fisheries, for example, and so I was asked to be on a group nonprofit in the state of Maryland around putting oysters back in the bay, and it's called the Oyster Recovery Partnership. So I certainly jumped on that because I'm very interested in both, the biological side of it, but also the fact that, in this case, the oyster has just been neglected terribly over the last 50 years. And so we're making great progress. And so because I have a really strong interest in that, I spend a lot of time. I chair the board of the Oyster Recovery Partnership, for example. But I think it's really, really important to, to be part of the community fabric and both to know what's going on, but also to share whatever talents you have, with that group.
Jim, there's anecdotal, if not quantitative evidence that lots and lots of folks are now working from home, and that something like a third of the American workforce is able to work remotely. And of course, you run a plant, lots of plants and farms, and those folks have to be there. You've got to have boots on the ground. How has recruitment and retention of employees, particularly on the entrepreneurial side, but also just employees who are new hires, how has that been impacted over the last 12 months, where you go from a period of almost full employment to a period where there's been radical change in the employment market?
Well, there's so many changes going on right now. I mean, the whole thing about working away from home, we certainly were not participating a whole lot in that. We were doing some alternative workspace, we call it. But now, of course, it's changed dramatically, and it's something I think we're adjusting to. I mean, I'm old school. The CEO of the company is a bit old school, and you don't feel comfortable when somebody is. So many people are not attending meetings and that sort of thing. So it's a lot of getting used to, and I don't think for us we want to go back as soon as we can to being face to face as much as we can. But I think as an outcome of this, we will definitely have more people who will, be working more from home because the technology is there, and it's a matter of managing that, making sure people are accountable for that. As far as hiring, we've actually made some senior people hires during this period. It's been a bigger challenge, obviously, but I think it really hasn't stopped. That part of our recruitment has not been impeded by the virus.
Jim, earlier on you talked about the difference between your leadership and Frank's leadership. What about the next generation in the family?
Well, it's a whole new world out there, and that's the exciting thing. It's a different generation. The millennial generation and the next generation after that. We have 5 family members working in the company, and they're all, those age groups. And of course, technology is one of the big differences. I mean, I come from an era where if you're doing marketing, you're doing TV advertising, as well as some other stuff. But today, one of my sons, for example, is in our e-commerce team, which we just started up in January, fortuitously, before the pandemic, where we send product to people's doorsteps. But how you do that, I mean, how you promote is entirely different. You hire influencers, you're doing a lot of digital, you're doing a lot of alternative social media work, and that is something I am not, you know, certainly not connected with as much as they are. They also understand, I think, the speed with which we move. Being a bigger company, being nimble is critically important, and the bigger you get, it seems like it's harder to do. So, they're very good at kind of challenging us and saying, "Hey, come on now, what's going on? We're not moving fast enough in organic or in pasture or some other product." So that's something they can bring. I think that's a real advantage.
Jim, you mentioned that being large sometimes makes it difficult to be nimble, but how important that is. I liken it to turning a tugboat versus turning a barge. It's very difficult for large, particularly bureaucratic organizations, but just in general, large organizations to pivot. Can we chat for a moment about your experience with Leadership Maryland and how that helped connect you to the community and some folks you do business with and have become friendly with and have volunteered with and so forth?
Yeah, well, I mean, number one, it was great to get out and see different parts of the state of Maryland, see the issues, see the problems, and at the time that I was on Leadership Maryland, there was a lot going on as it relates to the environment. Some of you may have remember Pfisteria and the issues around that during the Glendenning administration. And so, one of the advantages is when I joined Leadership Maryland, a couple of people were from, for example, the Chesapeake Bay Foundation and another organization. And what you find, of course, is typically, when you're in a situation like Leadership Maryland, you get to know each other. A glass of wine before dinner, and you find out you have a lot more in common than you don't. And so those relationships have, I think, lingered through the years. So that it helped me, for example, I think, just look at other styles of leadership, and that's what you do. You learn by observing leaders and leadership. So it was very helpful for me.
Jim, I first met you in 1989. They were flying me in from Boston to teach a Saturday morning executive MBA class, and I didn't know who you were at the time. But the subject matter we were talking about was communications, in particular executive communications. What a leader says and how that leader says it is very important. What is your philosophy regarding communications?
Oh, well, communications is tremendously important, especially the size of your organization. I mean, back when my dad had 100 people working in the company and everybody played softball at lunch, it was a different situation than when you have 21,000 people that you would love to talk to every day, but you can't. So we do a lot of things. One thing we implemented when I became CEO and we had the new president was state of the business meetings every year. And we go to every location nationwide, and it takes a month. But we go there, we have dinner with the management team, we go to the operation, and then we have an open hall presentation on how we did for the year. It's the end of our fiscal year when we do it, and what our plans are coming for the upcoming year. And I think it's very much appreciated by the rank and file out, where the real job gets done in those operations. And we continue to do those. We've been doing them since 1991, and we do a mid-year, video just to tell them where we're at halfway through the year. So I think keeping people informed is really important. We even let our hourly workers in our plants know how we're doing. We don't give specific numbers, but we give them we're above or below target, because they get paid. Every hourly worker gets a bonus every year. And it's a profit bonus, basically, if we are not only profitable, but depending on how profitable we are. And so that keeps them interested also in how the company is doing, which is our goal. So, the whole area of communications is really, really critical to to running a successful business today, especially a large business.
Jim, we're getting to the point in our show where we're hopeful that you can give us one tip or one nugget of wisdom that anyone listening could take with them and say, what is the path or a step in becoming a better leader, in developing your leadership acumen? What would it be? What would that one thing be?
In thinking about that, number one is be yourself. If I had tried to act like my dad, I'm not an entrepreneur. I'm not what he was. So I had to kind of develop my own footsteps, and I think from a credibility, integrity standpoint, that's really, really important. If you want people to follow you, that's something that's very important. And part of that is taking on a cause. I think my dad's cause was clearly quality. That was it. I mean, there was nothing more important than quality. Well, for me, it became people. And so we focused on people. We focused on safety in our plants, and we're now world class. Nobody in our industry can touch our safety record, OSHA safety record. And it's because it took a lot of hard work and years to do it. Putting wellness centers in all of our facilities where an hourly worker can come off the line, see a doctor in the plant of their choice, and then go back to work and never have to pay a thing, which reduces the cost of our health care, plus it's better for their health individually. So we did a lot of things around people because that became kind of my cause. And when we talk about goals in the company, we talk about the 4 Ps of people, products, planet, and profitability, and people is number one. And so I think you have to stand for something. And I would say that our CEO right now, he has taken on diversity, and that is his number one. He's hired a diversity officer. He's the one that conducts all the diversity projects that we're doing, and so that is something that he's taken on. So I think you have to stand for something that people go, yeah, that at the end of the day, when he retired, this is what he was known for. So I think it's important to do that.
Jim, you've been a fantastic guest. I knew you would be, and I thank you for joining us. Memo, do you have any closing thoughts?
Jim, thank you very much.
Sure, Memo.
Thank you all for listening to Engaging Leaders, a Leadership Maryland podcast brought to you by Beacon at Salisbury University and BFG Financial Advisors. This is your host, Eric Brotman, and my co-host, Memo Diriker, reminding you to stay engaged. Be sure to tune in for new content every month.
You've been listening to Engaging Leaders, a Leadership Maryland podcast. Leadership Maryland is the foremost statewide organization where critical conversations occur in an environment of trust and civility to facilitate actionable change. For more information, visit us at www.engagingleaderspodcast.com. Please subscribe and leave us a review on your favorite podcast platform.